Coaches, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Chaz Henry, and I am the founder of PowerChalk.com. Today I'm speaking with pitching coach Phil Rosengren. Phil, are you laced up and ready?
I'm ready to go.
All right, coaches. Phil is one of those guys who's both a teacher and a perpetual student of the game. I've come to know Phil through his video analysis sessions on PowerChalk, and I've seen him work with little leaguers, I've seen him work with pros, and really every player at every level in between. As a pro, he's pitched in the same rotation as Cy Young winner CC Sabathia, and as a coach, he started BetterPitching.com, coming up now on 10 years. So Phil, get us started here. The topic today is drop and drive. I asked you earlier for your definition of those two terms. Let's start with drop and drive.
Sure, yeah, when you're talking about, they're basically two schools of thought. So you got drop and drive or tall and fall. And drop and drive is basically, I'll just read the definition here and we can talk a little more about it. But basically it's a mode of your pitching motion where the pitcher lets his center of gravity drop early in his stride and uses his back leg a little more, which leads to usually a longer, faster stride. And you think of guys, right here you've got Yu Darvish. He's a guy who you can see in this picture, he's letting his hips drop as he comes out of his stride, and then he's got a real long, powerful stride. Oftentimes when guys think about drop and drive, and it was really a term that is often associated with the guy Tom Seaver, going back to one of the classic pitchers of all time, and he's the guy people usually think of as the prototypical drop and drive guy. He was real successful doing it, and so a lot of guys try to copy that. It's a challenging delivery to copy because it's very dynamic and explosive, and I think oftentimes people misinterpret what's really going on here. So when people hear the term drop and drive, oftentimes they think it's letting the hips sink or dropping and then driving. And what you can really see here with Darvish even is as he's coming out of his leg lift, and that image all the way on the right, there's still some early momentum. He's starting that movement towards home plate, and it's really a matter of moving down and out at the same time. So it's not so much drop and then drive, it's dropping while driving down the mound.
Yeah, when we talked about that earlier, first of all, I want to make note of the word early, because you and I said in scrubbed videos a couple days ago, and there's a lot of guys who I think almost all coaches would say he's a tall and fall guy, and when we looked at them close, they had a real drop and drive element in.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the two terms, drop and drive or tall and fall. They explain different ends of the spectrum, but really most guys sit somewhere in between. And really, true tall and fall usually it doesn't really exist. When you look at hard-throwing major league pitchers, there aren't too many guys who don't get the back leg into it. So maybe we can go into the next one and talk a little bit about tall and fall.
Sure.
So people kind of understand the difference. And Randy Johnson here, he's probably the prototypical guy.
Well, he's the prototype for tall, isn't he?
Exactly. I mean, that's a good point, too. So if we think about the definition here, sort of a basic definition we came up with where the pitcher stays tall and maintains a higher center of gravity during his stride, letting gravity doing more of the work, using that mound to his advantage. This usually leads to a slower stride and the pitcher throws more downhill. Because basically the pitcher's just getting tall and then getting some momentum towards home plate and letting his body just go down the mound without really getting those hips, like letting the hips and the center of gravity drop and getting things moving powerfully with the back leg. It's more about just get tall, get your body moving towards home plate, let gravity do the work. The funny thing actually about Randy Johnson, when you look at him, he is a guy, when you think about a pitcher throwing more downhill, he's got that real tall body and big frame. His arm slot was actually out to the side. So he wasn't necessarily a guy who did this in order to create a downward plane with his pitch. But it worked for him, this pitch and delivery, more so because he's a guy who's 6'10", and has a massive frame. So all he needed to do was get tall and then kind of get things going, and he could generate a ton of velocity because he has this real wide wingspan and wide shoulders and everything that allow him to create a lot of force with his pitch. But for most pitchers, especially if they're not on the taller end of the spectrum, they're going to need to engage that back leg and get their hips moving powerfully down the mound. Because really when you think about what's the goal or the objective of your pitch delivery. It's to maximize power in your pitching motion while also maintaining control. So you want to maximize power and velocity while maintaining control. Tall and fall sometimes can be easier to stay under control, but it's also slower. So if the goal is to move powerfully and get your body moving powerfully towards home plate, you want to have a little drop in it to get your hips and your center of gravity moving powerfully down the mound.
It's interesting because you bring up something that comes up also in hitting, and that is linear versus rotational. And what I've come to see in looking at thousands of videos is, like you said earlier, there's nobody who's really pure. I mean, you get even a Pujols, who's the prototype for rotational hitting, and he's got some linear movement. And it's really hard not to have some linear movement and then convert that into, a rotational swing at some point. So real quickly, give me a couple pros and cons. And I guess I'm asking that of the more pure, of the Randy Johnson versus the Tom Seaver.
Sure. And I think you make a great point, too, because it's really both going on. You've got in your stride, you've got some linear drive towards home plate, and then you want to convert that to powerful rotation. So you got both those things going on in your pitching motion for sure. Some guys are just more extreme to one end or the other. Some guys, if they have a real long, dynamic, powerful stride, they typically will get lower, and you think of them as a drop and drive guy. If they stay tall, you're going to think of them more as a tall and fall guy. The pros of a tall and fall delivery would be, again, it's a little bit maybe easier to repeat. Some guys find that when they take the drop and drive approach, it's more dynamic, it's faster, but they can get out of sync. I actually think it's kind of the opposite, because tall and fall, the real negative to me is that when kids hear tall and fall, they think they need to be stiff with the back leg, and it often leads to guys not getting their back leg into it at all, and it leads to a very slow stride with a lack of power. So for most pitchers, that's going to be a bad thing. They're not going to be getting the amount of power they want in their pitching motion.
Right.
So for me, it's an ideal pitching motion to be somewhere in between, where they're letting their center of gravity drop a little bit, engaging that back leg so they can really get their body moving powerfully down the mound. But you have to take into account what the pitcher's working with. So some guys have more hip mobility and flexibility, and they're going to be able to get more aggressive with their stride without it affecting their command, where some guys may not have that flexibility, and they're going to be better off with a little bit of a less aggressive stride, you could say.
Okay, so
we're looking at Randy Johnson here.
Yeah, and as a coach, I mean, so I guess that's one of your, sort of early assignments is to assess the athlete, see if he's got the quick twitch muscles, the temperament for being fast or for being slow. Because I think if you fit the wrong suit to the wrong guy, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the things to keep in mind with both approaches, sort of the reason I don't actually like to teach either. I don't like to use that as a cue for pitchers to think of drop and drive or tall and fall, because when you think of drop and drive, a lot of guys will just sink and then try to drive out. And really what I try to get guys doing, and same with tall and fall, if they hear tall and fall, they usually are just stiff with the back leg and they don't get the back leg into it. So what I like to get guys thinking about is create some early momentum in your pitching motion, because that's what you see all hard-throwing power pitchers do, is they get a little bit of an early weight shift and get their center, their hips, moving towards home plate, and then engage the back leg by kind of sitting back a little bit into their stride. Just engage the back leg. Some guys will do it more. Some guys will get deeper. Like we got David Cohn right here. He gets real deep, real low early in his stride. So he's more of a typical drop and drive guy, what people would refer to as that. But you do want to engage the back leg even if you are a guy who stays a little taller in his stride. So I like to create some early momentum, engage the back leg, get your body moving powerfully towards home plate.
Well, with that, Coach, you may have just created a new term or changed around the term. It's really drive and drop, is it not?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to think about it.
Because like you said, you get that momentum going. First. Yeah, the momentum comes first. Whether you do it. It's funny. You think of Juan Marichal, you think of Sandy Koufax, and you even look at Cohn here. The big leg kicks, where it was an integral part, as opposed to just picking it up and then letting it, slide toward the plate.
Right.
I won't say they're gone. Darvish has a pretty good leg kick, but the big leg kicks are gone, aren't they?
think to some extent, I mean, there are all different styles out there. The leg kick is something that, for some people, it helps them to get loaded up and create that momentum before the leg comes down. So that's kind of like the real advantage of a leg lift. But you don't necessarily need it. And I think some guys have really like during the 80s and 90s, people have steered young pitchers away from having a big leg lift because they thought it would throw them off balance. And there was a lot of work where people would just emphasize, get to a balance point, get to a balance point, get to a balance point. They'd lift their knee up and hold it at their belt buckle. What that does, it kind of kills momentum. And I think the more you look at video, and that's why tools like PowerChalk are tremendous, because it lets you see what big league powerful pitchers actually do. Most power pitchers, when they're coming out of their leg lift, they have a shift, and they actually get their body moving towards home plate. And if you do that, if you come to a balance point and stop, with young pitchers especially, when they learn that at an early age, they kill their momentum. And basically they have to kind of throw from a standstill. And then it's like that slope of the mound, there's no benefit to it because they're not using it. They're not creating any early momentum in their stride that's going to help them use more of their body to pitch. I mean, when you're pitching, when you're throwing the ball from the outfield and you want to throw it as hard as you can, you get a running start and throw. From the mound, you can't do that. But what you can do is try to get your body moving as powerfully towards home plate as you can. And the way you do that is by creating some early momentum in your leg lift.
That's a great point. That's a great analogy with the outfielder. I mean, you absolutely. And for me, and the pure rotational, which, like I said earlier, there are very few of, but if you were to take a pure rotational approach, it's the same issue. I mean, if you're going to throw a punch, you wouldn't throw it completely flat-footed without taking a step and driving your hips and your shoulder.
Right. Exactly.
Take us through, if you would. We've got David Cohn here, and let's go to the very top here.
Sure.
And let's start through it. So
just watching Cohn go through his pitching motion, he was definitely a guy you would describe as, or most people would associate with, a drop-a-drive guy. Because as he comes to his leg lift, he's getting nice and tall and loaded up, but the first move as he begins to come out of that leg lift is to let his center of gravity drop. What you don't see as much from the back is that while he's doing this, he's also initiating a move towards home plate. So he's not just sinking straight down over his back foot, he's getting low while moving his center of gravity towards home plate. And this leads to a lower stride, a longer stride, but it helps him to really get all that power going towards home plate. And obviously it worked for him. This is a game, the video we're looking at here is from when he had 19 strikeouts as a young pitcher with the Mets. And then here, if we look at Yu Darvish, another good example. The reason that Darvish is actually a good guy to look at here is because most people think of tall and fall being the best pitching model for a taller pitcher. But here's Yu Darvish, who's actually like 6'5". So he's a big, tall pitcher, but he has tremendous flexibility and lower half mobility in his hips, where he is much more of a drop and drive guy, and it works for him. So you have to kind of work with what a pitcher's got, and what you'll see is as he is coming out of his leg lift, in this line right there, just kind of showing his front hip, notice how the front hip is moving towards home plate as he's coming out of his stride. So it's dropping the hips while also moving towards home plate. And you'll notice how strong he is with that back leg. It's almost like if there was a chair, if we freeze it right here, if you put like a chair or a stool out, down towards the mound, it's like he's kind of sitting back into that chair. There's an imaginary chair behind it. And that's one thing I try to describe to pitchers sometimes is imagine a stool or a chair 2 to 3 feet down the mound as you come out of your leg lift, and think about sitting back to that chair. And what that helps them do is they can feel the sort of engaging that back leg and letting their center drop a bit as they move towards home plate while staying strong with that back leg. A key thing here, so you see how low he gets, Darvish here in his stride. He's got a real long, powerful stride. Right here is where if you don't have the leg strength and the flexibility to do this, you're not going to be able to perform your delivery very well this way. Because what you need to do after you create all that force towards home plate is firm up with the landing leg. So you don't want the knee to leak out over the toe. And that's really what Darvish does really well here is you'll see the knee stabilize, that front leg stabilize, and then he's able to finish his delivery over that strong front leg.
Well, that's interesting. That's kind of cool. In Koufax's biography, he described his release as pole vaulting off of his front foot.
Ah, there you go. It's funny because I'd read, I don't recall that. I did read the book, but that's a very interesting description because basically what you're trying to do is get your body moving powerfully towards home plate, so generating some force and power in your stride, and then you want to firm up with that front side so you can really transfer all that power up into your hips, your trunk, your upper half, and finish off with that late whip with your throw.
Well, and again, it kind of reminds me of the the same discussions we've had around hitting. When the linear movement stops and the rotation begins is when that heel goes down.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Actually, if we go back here, one key thing, Darvish is a great example of a guy who, if we go kind of late in his stride, just advance out to his stride, he stays very loaded with his hips as he's moving towards home plate. And you'll see going into front foot plant, we just go click back a couple of frames to where his foot's off the ground, even a little bit further back, and notice how closed off he is with his hips, where his belt buckle's kind of facing third base.
Right.
Right here, he's really loaded with his hips. And then it's right as he's about to go into landing where he unwinds with the lower half. So the hips start to open into landing. And this is where you create a lot of power as a picture, where the belt buckle starts to turn and face home plate into landing, and the chest is still facing third base. And you got that hip-to-shoulder separation that guys sometimes will talk about. And that creates real powerful torque and twisting power. And then it's when that front leg stabilizes, the upper half can really rotate powerfully around it and catapult down over that front leg. And that's kind of the one area where it's a little different from hitting, is that you have that catapult with the trunk, where you can actually get some power from that forward trunk tilt as well after
right.
foot plant.
Let's do something real quickly, Coach. I'm going to measure Darvish here, and again, based on this is pixels, so we of course don't know if he's 5 foot or 6 foot here. But if I'll measure him and then slide him forward, and let's measure again.
The other thing too is a little bit of a the camera shot's not directly from the side.
Yeah, it really isn't. So that shows 88, and I'm guessing he's at least 100%.
Yeah, no, he is, and I've seen some other ones from where it's directly from the side, where it would be more than that 100%, 110%
right
range.
Now, you're absolutely right. And by the way, coaches, if you're shooting for analysis, which this obviously wasn't. This looks like game footage. Then you want to shoot orthogonal. And what I mean by that is either straight, the umpire view straight on. You want to shoot the third base view straight in, or you want to shoot a center field view. Because when you draw these lines and you're 45 degrees like we are here, you don't get perfect measures. So, but it's not hard to see he's taken a very healthy stride there.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing too, like some guys will look at, if we kind of compare so many different things, but with his front leg, he stabilizes, but he doesn't lock out with his front knee. And some guys will think that they need to really, they'll see some pitchers lock out with that front knee or get real straight with their landing leg and think that that's a must. It's not as essential, especially for guys who have that real long, powerful stride. If they're generating so much force in their stride, it's going to be very difficult to really stiffen up all the way with that front leg to ball release.
Now, I'm a Dodger fan, so I have to pull up the obligatory Clayton Kershaw. And this is interesting to me, because as we looked at this and we were classifying pitchers, and I'm throwing names at you and you're saying he's this and he's that, Clayton Kershaw to me was tall and fall, and that to me was evidenced first, by the fact that he completely gathers himself over the rubber. I mean, he looks like he's building momentum, and he's going to, and he does release it very gradually by letting that front foot slide, down the hill. But
yeah,
you take it from there,
up, down, and out guy. So there's another kind of school of thought or training, that sort of an approach that some coaches will take with pitchers, where they say, take your knee up and then take your foot down and then go out. And it's almost like maybe Kershaw was taught that at a young age. He kind of made up for that by generating good early momentum after that front foot hits the ground. Because a lot of times when young kids hear that up, down, and then out, there's no momentum at all created, and they just step out with the front foot, and they really get no power with their stride because they didn't build any momentum early. What you see with Kershaw, though, is, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to be honest with you, when I draw that line right there, and then we look at him, obviously a leg lift that high is creating a lot of potential energy. But when we take him to the point where he's dropped that leg, he's basically given all that potential energy back. There's no movement toward the plate.
Right. Yeah. No, very, very minimal movement to the plate. So his leg lift is more just his own style, and because he likes to do it. But there's no actual mechanical benefit to it in terms of creating power in his delivery. At least not for Kershaw. Some guys, if you leave that leg up as you're starting to move towards home plate, then you're going to be sort of building momentum and power that way. What he does, though, he could basically throw just as hard and powerfully from a slide step, which he does. He's one of the best kind of slide step pitchers out there out of the stretch, because he really shifts his weight powerfully towards home plate, and you see how much he sits back into his stride, engages that back leg, which allows him to really move his hips in the center down the mound powerfully. So everything you saw earlier where he's up, down, and then out, like that up and down part is not essential at all. He just likes to do it. But he does shift his weight forward really powerfully, and that's the part that if you're a young pitcher trying to get as much power as you can in your pitching delivery, that's the part you want to model.
Well, you know, it's very interesting to me. Let's split the screen here, and let's make Kershaw right-handed so he matches up to Darvish here.
Sure.
And you know, if you notice here, let me take Darvish back to, you know, a similar position, very similar right there.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And Kershaw is a guy with a good, long, powerful stride, despite that, you know, real slow beginning and methodical beginning approach to his pitching motion. But once you start that move towards home plate, it's real powerful. He gets low, and there definitely are some similarities. Arm slot a little different, and you also see that Kershaw does firm up a little more with that front leg, stiffen up a little bit with it. But again, you know, that is an element of transfer. That's something that if you are able to do that really well, that will help to transfer power into your upper half so that you can really catapult well over that front leg. But it's not essential. So like a guy like Tom Seaver didn't really stiffen up with his, or straighten up with his front leg, I should say, and same thing with Darvish. But they did not allow their front knee to collapse or leak out over their toe where it becomes an energy leak. They definitely stabilize well so they can transfer all that power from their stride up into their upper half.
Interesting.
So it's very similar here.
Yeah, that's a real key right there.
Yeah, basically that's one of the things I look for a lot with young pitchers especially is that knee leaking out over their toe, and it's something you do not see with hard-throwing major league pitchers after ball release, through ball release. That knee is not going to continue on past the toe. The hips also are not going to continue to move towards home plate. They're going to basically rotate around that strong landing leg.
Right.
Stabilizing with that landing leg is so key because all that power needs to rotate and catapult powerfully around that front leg.
Interesting.
Most power pitchers will kind of finish a little off towards their glove side because of that powerful rotation, just the momentum carrying them around.
Right. A la Bob Gibson.
Yeah, that's right. And if your stride's a little offline, it'll be even more aggressive the way he was Gibson. He's a scary guy to face, I'm sure.
I'm showing my age. So Coach, we're in the middle of the seventh time-wise, and at this point, I guess you've got the choice whether you'd rather sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" or you want to take a few questions.
I think I'll pass up on the singing as much as I appreciate the opportunity. I'll go to the Q&A.
All right. So Pete asks, what recommendations can you give to an 11-year-old who pitches with accuracy but without a lot of power?
Sure. I mean, I think for most guys who are accurate, that's great because accuracy is just kind of target practice. What you want to do to maximize power and efficiency is to really get their body moving powerfully towards home plate. So we looked at the video here of guys who get that early momentum towards home plate as they come out of their leg lift and then engage the back leg. And that's really the key thing that I would work on with a young pitcher who's not throwing real hard is if they've got decent arm action and they're throwing strikes, are they using their body as well as they could? Are they getting their hips and their center moving towards home plate powerfully? So I would first work on early weight shifts, getting things started, engaging that back leg, and really just emphasizing getting their body moving towards home plate as powerfully as they could.
Okay, next question.
Actually, going back to that too, because another thing, sorry about that, but one other aspect of that is that sometimes a trap you can fall into as a coach, a parent, or a young pitcher is thinking that it's all about strikes and they want to throw strikes, and that is a very important part of pitching, obviously. But if you spend all of your time just focusing on having perfect mechanics or just making sure that you get to certain positions in your pitching motion, you end up slowing things down to a point where you're going to be losing power. So I believe that, yes, mechanical efficiency is key, and it's huge for pitchers to learn how to move well in their pitching motion, but that's it. It's about moving well. It's not just getting to positions. And sometimes what kids are missing is just some practice where the goal is throw as hard as you can. Get your body into it and just let it go. And
right.
That's part of it. All these guys we're watching, I am sure, are very confident that when they were young pitchers, they spent some time where they were just trying to throw the heck out of the ball. And that's how you develop real power, arm action, and powerful deliveries. So that definitely has to be part of it.
Okay, next question from Juan. How important is it for the front foot to be oriented towards the catcher? I've noticed a lot of kids have a tendency to land at a 45-degree angle. Is this important? And if it is, how do you correct that?
It's important if it's hindering their pitching motion. So if a guy's landing really blocked off with the front foot where it's not getting open, so if it's closed off at landing pointed towards third base, what that's going to prevent, like right here you see with Kerry Wood, as he's striding out, if we stop it before foot plant, you'll see how his toes kind of pointed a little bit towards the third base line, and then he gets his hips open into landing so that it is pointed more towards home plate, and that's where the back foot's coming off the rubber and the hips are opening into front foot plant. So if a guy's blocked off and his toe is still pointed at towards the third base dugout when his front foot hits, he's not able to get his hips open that way, and that's going to create some issues where he's not going to be able to really get the hips into his pitching motion, or he's going to compensate by like leaning overweight to his left and just being unstable and off balance. So you're losing power and accuracy.
So the answer is you really do have to get it pointed if you're going to get a good rotation and separation. Is that?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be perfectly pointed directly at the catcher, but it's somewhere in that kind of general vicinity. So if it's open a little bit towards first base, okay. If it's closed a little bit towards third base, okay. But if it's really drastic, a 45-degree angle I would consider extreme, where it's going to affect their ability to get their hips into their motion. And really, as far as what to do to work on that, there's definitely drill work that you can do. Have to kind of start out in that position, that front foot plant, and you get used to what that feels like to have the foot pointed a little bit more towards home plate. I like to have guys kind of turn the foot in a tiny bit for stability. So instead of pointed directly at the catcher, turned in a little bit towards third base just because it's more stable. But to get that feel, and then just to work on that in their pitching motion as they practice it, you can kind of draw a line in the dirt or wherever you're working at. Actually, this video here is interesting that we're looking at, because this is Brandon McCarthy, another guy who stays very tall in his pitching motion. If you look at him here, at front foot plant, and that toe is pointed at home plate again, what you notice is he's very tall in his delivery, but as he comes out of his leg lift, you will see him engage the back leg. So, again, that's my big issue with the idea of tall and fall is kids often hear that, or young pitchers hear that, and they don't engage the back leg at all. But you do want to engage that back leg. If we're looking at him at front foot plants right here, going into pitch release, you see how he's able to get those hips all the way open as he goes into ball release. And that's really a key. That's where if your foot's too blocked off, too open, too closed, you're not going to be able to get those hips through efficiently.
All right,
just
Phil,
like Darvish, you close and then opening up into landing.
Phil, last question. We could do another half hour on this one alone.
Exactly. I get long-winded sometimes.
Charles asks, is it better to plant heel first or toe first, the dreaded heel strike?
Right. Yeah, exactly. The dreaded heel strike. For me, it's a non-teach. I don't teach one way or the other. You look at Greg Maddux, one of the most accurate, best pitchers of all time, and he was a heel striker. He came down on his heel first. So if that comes naturally,
I did not know that.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't even mess with that. I view it as an area that, unless it's really creating instability in his pitching motion, where he's spinning on his heel as he's throwing, then I'll look at it. But if I don't say you have to land on your toe or you have to land the ball of your foot. You just want to be stable with that front foot through ball release. So that's really a key thing, and that's one of the main things I'll look at with the pitchers. Are they stable with their landing foot through ball release as they're throwing? Is that front foot stable, or is it spinning, or are they coming out off the edge of their foot as they're throwing? Again, that's where it's tough to see that while you're trying to catch a pitcher, so video is good for that. But you look at all these guys, you'll see that through ball release, they're very stable with that landing foot. How exactly you come down and land is not something I really think matters a whole lot. It's just whatever comes naturally to the pitcher.
Coaches, that pretty much wraps up our session today. I hope you have found this thought-provoking. For me, these sessions continue to demonstrate not only that there are efficient and optimal mechanics for a sports motion, but that they vary within the individual, within the athlete, within their flexibility. I don't know if we could have, you could ever get Randy Johnson that we see here throwing like Tim Lincecum. Even when they played on the same team. I mean, this even varies with what we said earlier, muscle twitch tendencies. So what's right for Lincecum, it may not work for your son. So I think for me, one of the takeaways is if you're not scrubbing video and if you're not looking at these nuances, that Coach Phil has demonstrated today, you're potentially missing out on speed, command, efficiency, all of the things, that he listed as contributing, and being related to these particular motions. So Coach Phil, I want to thank you for your time today. We mostly talked about basically the push-off, or, the whole webinar series was tall and fall versus drop and drive. Let's tee this up again, and let's go through the different pieces, of the pitching stroke. And what we can do is that'll be the end of this session. Coaches, you'll find this session listed at www.getbetterfaster.tv. So if you're looking for this, it'll probably be up later today. And what we'll do, I'll stop the session there. And Phil, if you want to take a couple more questions, we'll do that.